Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, the brand new video game show from the kids over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, May 25th, 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and alongside me is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
I saw when you added that into the doc, and I was like, I appreciate that one. That's a good intro for me.
I like that one a lot. That might be one you get a couple times here. Trevor, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Enjoying the end here of our Memorial Day weekend as we sit down and record this.
Mm-hmm.
It was a busy but also like relaxing weekend, so that was nice.
Yeah, I feel like you've recorded a few things now.
Yep. It's my third show. I mean, at this point, like I'm used to kind of 3 shows on a weekend. But yeah, this is the second one I did with you.
It is, yeah.
Our D+ show on Wally, which you can hear as of yesterday if you're listening to this.
Yes. But without further ado, let's hop into the main story of today's episode, I will imagine, about this little thing called coronavirus. The entire world has been affected and disrupted by the global pandemic caused by COVID-19. We are at a transformative pivot point in global history where profound change and calls for radical reforms and alterations to how we live, shop, socialize, and yes, even work are being demanded. In the wake of all this, it is expected that the post-pandemic workplace and life in general will look quite different to how it does now. Yet Rob Fahey from GamesIndustry.biz has a different thought. What if very little changes? What if the world and workspaces we return to, instead of being profoundly changed, are actually more or less the same? So Trev, what does the post-COVID world, and more particularly the post-COVID workplace, look like in your eyes going forward?
Yeah, so looking at this story, it kind of harkened back to the shoutout I had kind of in our first episode, where kind of the Zynga CEO talked about how he really they weren't missing a beat in what they were encountering, and Rob here definitely proposes the like, in my opinion, kind of worst case scenario of like, hey, yeah, what if nothing really changes in this? And it's worst case scenario, but it is also probably like a most likely scenario because people hate change and are so averse to it. And so like the fact that, you know, it's Memorial Day weekend and I've got stupid goddamn families outside in the pool in the center of my complex that are out there screaming right now because they can't just stay indoors and keep social distancing and quarantined and whatnot. So people are looking to get back to whatever normal is as soon as possible, and that's like it's frustrating because this time of potential great change that has been forced upon us all could be a turning point, as you kind of allude to, that could just naturally force changes that wouldn't have otherwise happened because of people's complacency and people's like unwillingness to kind of shake from their foundations. They've been shaken from their foundations, so you can rebuild a new foundation from that. But people will probably not. People are lazy and people are lazy. Like a person is not lazy. It's that to paraphrase the Men in Black quote, people are stupid. A person is smart, but people are stupid, dumb animals, scared animals or whatever. And so yeah, like people, like I talked a couple weeks ago that theoretically, if the workforce kind of came out in mass after all of this was said and done and said, hey, work from home worked to a degree or to, in some capacity, and we don't need to be doing this. So let's figure out what this new shift looks like. You could see wildly changing industries and whatnot. But people will probably be like, well, I just want to go back to my office. I want to go back to, sitting in my cube or whatever and go back to doing what I was doing. I am familiar with that. I'm comfortable with that. I want to return to that normalcy, which is I'm not I'm not as extreme into the liberal, movements that some people I know are, but I definitely think that the normal that exists now is, to a large degree, the people at the top kind of enforcing normalcy, quote unquote, on the working class, and it benefits the people at the top. It does not benefit the people in the working class, and so I think like this could potentially see a dramatic shift in that, where it is going back to the 6 or 7 times I had to read the Communist Manifesto for different classes in college. It could be the proletariat rising up against the bourgeoisie, but it probably won't, because the bourgeoisie has been in power for so long that they've kind of gamed every element of our systems to really dominate it. I constantly see memes floating around, talking about how the idea of like, oh, if your employer, or if you make more money on unemployment, then it's because your employer is exploiting a poverty system, is not is not paying you what you're worth, kind of thing. Which we're seeing, because 30 plus million people, or 36 million people, are unemployed in the last month and a half. And I mean, even that, we saw this with the recession. We will see it again when this is all said and done. Those 36 million people aren't going to go back to work overnight. Even if everything, like, even if a vaccine came now and everybody could go back to work, a lot of those companies are going to be like, well, we can do what we need to do with fewer people. We just need to work those people harder. You see that all the time in these kinds of situations where people, like the people who still have their jobs are having to just work twice as hard, because suddenly they're still doing as much work as the company was doing beforehand. They're just doing it with significantly fewer people, so a lot of people have all of that work thrown on themselves, and you see that kind of, like, I remember seeing that in 2008 when we went through this the last time around.
I mean, I feel like that's especially true within the video game sphere. They're just going to crunch harder to make sure that they can kind of get past whatever kind of employee loss that they're kind of dealing with. Just make sure that everything kind of happens when it's supposed to happen still.
Yeah, it's not great that like we've seen 2 huge recessions here in our lifetime, and the impact it has on workers. After that, it is like, I had this conversation with my my folks not too long ago. The idea that I graduated college in 2008, so I left college right into the recession, and then I through circumstances found myself finding new work, basically going right into this one, and so it's like not great time to be a millennial. And that's one of the many reasons that the millennial generation is increasingly frustrated and jaded and all that stuff, is because we've had to deal with 9/11, we've had to deal with two recessions, 2 like world-changing recessions, and then just like inequalities abound as a result of that. So this article in particular, bringing it back to that, voices like admittedly one of my biggest fears walking away from all this, is that nothing changes and we just go back to whatever a status quo was, and there's rampant waste. But because it's not going to, it like what Rob doesn't really touch on here is that and I don't know how many jobs in the games industry are being impacted by this, if games industry jobs are being impacted in the way that so much of the rest of the economy is. But what Rob doesn't really touch on in here is that idea that those jobs aren't coming back. That is something that we're kind of like just pulling from that, is if your big EAs or whatever have let a bunch of people go, they're not going to immediately hire all those people back, in 2 months or 3 months time when, this becomes a more manageable and people can come back into the office or something. They're just going to keep working off of whatever staff they have, and they'll start to slowly hire people back as they, find a need for a position or something like that. So like it is going to absolutely, like you said, we're going to see like a ramp up in crunch again as a result, because that's what this industry has known and has done pretty much since its inception. And so like the few little bits of strides here and there hopefully stick, that we've seen in recent times. But I think a lot of it will kind of default back to, well, we've got to hit these deadlines, and we don't have a third of the team that we did, so everybody's got to pick up their share of the load, and people will do it because they're dedicated and want believe in their projects and all that kind of stuff, and they're passionate people. But it is again kind of the producers and the heads of the companies kind of exploiting that passion, which you see a lot in any artistic endeavor. The idea that I worked in theater or in nonprofit, and constantly like nonprofit pays less than their for-profit counterparts, and they exploit. Oh, well, you're working in a nonprofit, which means you're philanthropic by nature, and you care about this, you have a passion for this, so you're okay taking a pay cut compared to what you should be making. And I'm like, I have since grown past that that mentality and said, no, like the NFL is a nonprofit. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't pay livable wages and that kind of stuff. And if you try otherwise, it's because you're selling a load of bullshit. And so I think we'll see a lot of that too in this in the like even in the 2 weeks since I talked about the Zynga article. We've seen how antsy the rest of the and it's not even the rest of the world. It's being presented as like half the world, because it's being presented in the standard news cycle binary of there are people that want to go back to work and there are people that want to stay quarantined, when realistically it's like 83% of people want to stay quarantined, but those 17% of people are getting like blown up into equivalent of the half. And so those 17% of people is already like they're dominating the headlines and insisting that people go back to work, and states are opening up and citing like frustration and people want to get back to work. And it's frustrating. So like seeing that, there's probably not going to be this seismic shift, because the masses are bought into their system enough so that they just want to go back to the norm of that system, as opposed to the unknown of a new system.
It's interesting too. The first thing I want to almost touch on is something you kind of said earlier, which is kind of coming from this massive global recession in 2008, and then the effects of what is very possible to be a depression in this case, how large scale it might end up being. It's interesting in the case of America how basically throughout the vast majority of our history, up until the 1980s, when something important happened, after every kind of a recession or depression or financial crisis, a lesson was learned, and kind of from whether like small or large tweaks were made to the financial system to kind of try to learn from what we had failed to kind of observe before, and kind of make sure something doesn't happen again. And sometimes there were huge changes, as in the case of the Great Depression and kind of the invention of the modern welfare state and that kind of modern social democracy nation America has kind of turned into. Sometimes they were huge in the kind of case of like the 1890s, and sometimes they were modest. But no matter what, like after a recession or a depression, change always happened. And then in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was elected president, and when he had a recession on his hands in 81 and 82 and a little bit into 83, he didn't really change his economic course. He didn't really change anything. He just kind of kept going, cut taxes, spend more on defense. It'll all even out in the end. And to kind of perhaps the unfortunate long-term effects, it did even out in the end in that case. And so a different lesson was learned in that case, which is that we don't necessarily need to change things when things go wrong. We don't necessarily need to kind of adapt things, right? And instead, over time, what has happened is a lot of the strong policies that were put in place after the Great Depression were slowly kind of whittled down or weakened or repealed, which led the way for the 2008 financial crisis. And even there, change occurred, obviously. The Obama administration put in place policies to kind of prevent that kind of event from happening again. But then in 2017, President Trump came into office. And very similar to Reagan, he began to repeal some of the legislation. He began to weaken the kind of the administrative oversight. He began to, just disband the pandemic unit within the White House. So that when something like COVID-19 happens, we weren't equipped for it. We hadn't learned the lessons of the past pandemics and the past depressions and the past kind of financial crises. So we were left even more weakened to it again, right? In the last kind of 3 decades of American history, we've very often not learned from the past. And I think that is something that has been in my mind a lot throughout the COVID-19 crisis, of as people kind of have these big ideas of like what the world will look like and how it will be altered. I feel like I kind of come somewhere in between the more idealistic people and this opinion piece. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I think change will occur. Change will inevitably have to occur. I don't think it's going to be as wide-ranging and far-reaching as I think a majority of people are demanding. I do think we're going to see changes to the way that workplaces are run, right? Like I think an easy-ish one that we potentially could see is a 4-day work week, right? Like I think that's something I think that we could do, like you work 4 days at the office and like 1 day a week is pretty much guaranteed to be at home, or you just have off. Where like I know New Zealand is right now beginning to experiment with a 4-day work week.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is something that is potentially feasible. I think that it's all the small things, right? Like one of my favorite things to kind of have observed this primary season within American presidential politics is the fact that Joe Biden actually has one of the most progressive and liberal platforms in a generation. He just so happened to run in the same race as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and a few of the people who just had ones that were historically to the left, right? To the left, like we haven't seen in 50 years plus. And even now, like as COVID-19 has kind of really blown everything away, he's just increasingly taken on more and more and more far left ideas into his platform. Like if Joe Biden were to become president and actually enact half of what he kind of platform is, it would be a giant transformative change to kind of fundamental aspects of American life. It's just not talked about because he's Joe Biden and he's saying dumb shit on, The Breakfast Club. And so I think it's also like the small tweaks, right? Like I think so often people want they want a political revolution, right, Bernie? And that is very seldom how American, I think, ways of life have changed. I mean, there are moments in time where obviously that has happened, from the revolution itself to the Civil War to kind of the Great Depression, and this could be one of those moments. But I think I could also see it not being for a reason not even so sinister as like the bourgeoisie has its foot on the neck of working class Americans, as much as it is the fact that people want things to just be normal, right? Like people, I think, have a tolerance for radical change. Like I think of like in the wake of like 1920s America, right? Where like we'd undergone basically 20 years of the progressive era that like had just fundamentally altered everything in America, basically. And then we underwent the First World War, and then we underwent a giant worldwide pandemic. And so we get to the 1920 presidential election, and Warren Hardin's out here being like, I'm here to bring back a return to normalcy, which first off, normalcy is not a word. He just made up a word, but it's like it resonated deep within like what people felt, which is after a cataclysmic war and a cataclysmic pandemic and 20 years of radical change, they were tired. They were spent, right? And so that's kind of where I think we'll see some middle road thing, right? Like, I think the pandemic itself is change. It's altered people's lives in deeply profound ways. It's led to a quarter of the country losing their jobs, right? Like, those people are at a certain point going to reach a limit on how much they can change. And maybe that limit is after huge, broad, sweeping changes to the system, and maybe it's before it, right? Like, I do think things are going to change. The, like, opinion piece itself brings up a lot of points of, like, why things may or may not, and I think, yeah, like, events like GDC and PAX are still going to happen. Like, I think you can have people work from home and also have giant events. I think you can have more people have more flexibility in what their workspaces look like and still have big events. We're not saying you can never meet another person again, which at times I kind of feel like this piece is kind of like almost like suggestion where it's like you could never see anybody ever again. It's like, no, you can still have physical workplaces. You can still have giant convention-wide events, but we're also saying that maybe everybody at your company doesn't need to be in an office. You can say that if you work in like a sales job, the necessity for all of you to be in the same physical location is pretty slim. Like, that doesn't, you don't need to all be there. We're saying that for a lot of jobs, perhaps you don't need to always be at your company, right? Like, you've talked about your job, like I can talk about my job. Like, you don't need to always be on location for these kind of positions. You can telework sometimes and be there other times. Like, I think we will see some sort of broader flexibility in that. And then I don't know if it's like the thing that I'm just kind of like resigned to as much as, because it's also a positive in the same way, is the fact that I think, like most things in America, it's just going to be kind of scattershot. It's just going to kind of depend on where you live and where you work at, right? Like, I think some companies in some areas of the country are just going to have a way more progressive, like, workspace policy than other places are. Like, it's just the reality of the situation where it's like, if you live in Mississippi and Alabama, you might just have less options, because those kind of governments are probably just going to afford you fewer options, and those workplaces are probably just going to afford you fewer options. And if you work in San Francisco or New York or LA or, you know, Austin, maybe you'll have more. I think that regardless, what to me will ultimately decide this more than people wanting a return to a normal way of life or people's feelings on the bourgeoisie or anything else is the presidential election in 2020. I mean, that's to me is the answer on how fundamentally different the post-COVID world will look. Right? It's as simple as that. Is if Donald Trump wins, the answer is I don't think it'll look that much different at all. I think it'll cost significantly more lives, though. Whereas I think if Joe Biden is elected, I think there is a potential for it to look fundamentally different. And perhaps it is just me and my political science background, but I think the decision is that simple, right? Like, the people who want change, you have to kind of take it within your hands and kind of vote for that change a little bit and demand that change, irregardless, no matter who wins. Demand change and hold these people accountable either way, but also be aware that these two are kind of running on very different visions and ideas of the world that we are even in right now and kind of the reality of the situation. And so I'd also say that to me is probably the biggest determinant in how different the kind of COVID-19 workspace looks like in the future.
Yeah, I mean, even if Biden wins though, and McConnell like holds the Senate, like how much it, like he's just going to do what he did in the Obama years and just block everything. So I think we'll still
to a degree, right? But it's that thing of just as Trump has. I mean, again, it's a thing of like executive actions have the force of law while you're president, right? And it's to me, it's like one of the oldest kind of political adages where it's like, if people never have something and you continue to not give them that thing, they're not really upset. But once you give people something and then try to take it back from later on, that's when they get more angry, right? Like, Obamacare happened, and the Republicans have been talking for over a decade now about getting rid of it. But the thing is, once people got it and they saw the benefits of it, it became significantly more hard to kind of do away with, right? Like, at one point in time, the Republican Party had control of the presidency in both houses of Congress, and they still couldn't get rid of the thing, right? Like, it is harder to, like, that's the thing. Like, even if Joe Biden has just 4 years in office, if he expands these things, and then a Republican wave happens 4 years later, it's harder to take away people's rights once you've given them to them. It's harder to take away kind of privileges once you've given them to people, right? Like,
Yeah,
that
I'm
is
saying
kind of the
though
lesson learned.
McConnell wouldn't allow him to even expand those things because like
Sure, but
Obamacare was still like happened with Democrats controlling all like the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So if the buck stops with Mitch, then like anything Biden tries to expand is going to be limited because it'd be in executive action.
it will be
capabilities.
limited, right? Like, potentially, like, but executive actions, executive orders can solve a thing. Like, no matter what, the House won't go Republican this year. Like, that majority is going to be too large. And I would argue the Senate, like, I would argue worst case scenario, the Senate majority is still going to shrink. Like, it's still going to be smaller. Like, they're just, the way the seats are, right? Like, kind of the political map is more favorable to Democrats this year. And 2 years from now, in 2022, it'll be very favorable to Democrats, right? So it is also a thing of, if Joe Biden wins and they keep the House and then they lose the Senate but gain like a seat or two, well, then in 2 years it'll be more favorable for them, right? Like, and it's also that thing of, I think if, I mean, now we're just purely speculative at this
Yeah,
point,
and now we're just like completely into politics talk, not even really video
but it
game
is
stuff.
it is that thing of, I would just say, if Trump loses, I don't want to give the Republican Party too much credit because that's led me wrong before, but I do think it will be some sort of wake-up call for some of them where they feel like kind of the shackles are a little bit released to kind of make some sort of deals, right? Like, it is that thing of not everybody, and like, there are people in the Republican Party who actually do care about, the country as a whole and their kind of constituents, and then also, even if they don't care about that, they care about getting reelected, right? Like, it is also that thing of, they can read poll numbers just as well as everybody else can, and I think if things continue to stay as kind of not great as they are now, right, and if the COVID-19 kind of situation really gets worse as time goes on, into kind of the summer and fall, I expect Trump's numbers certainly not to get better, right, and if it becomes like the poll number lead Biden has over Trump right now stays the same in the fall, I think you might see some kind of sort of desire for something to happen, some sort of deal to happen. And then even more for in like 2 years from now, right? Like, where it is, all right, things have begun to improve and turn around. Like, I think Mitch McConnell is a lot of things, most of them I can't say in the podcast, but I don't necessarily think Mitch McConnell is stupid. Like, I think he wants to be basically in charge of the Senate until he's dead. And so I think if the situation doesn't look good, he'll try to make some sort of deal to kind of be like, oh, we did this thing, though. But also, again, I think the basic level is, whether it's at the city, state, or federal level, the people in positions of power are in positions to change how things look in your workplace. But I do think we're going to see some change. I am more optimistic than this opinion piece is about what the future of workplaces are going to look like in America. Do I think it's going to necessarily be fundamental change? And some of the kind of most optimistic ones I've heard, I do not. But I do think we're going to get more than this is. And I do think within the games industry itself, you're going to see things change in how workplaces are operated, is what I would say.
Fair. I've been trying to scroll through my Facebook feed because I saw earlier today it was like a graphic image that was like, it was a quote, or it was I put in air quotes, a quote from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and because it's on Facebook, I don't really buy any of it. But I don't buy that it's actually something she said, but it certainly is possible and fits her tone, and the sentiment still applies. So I was trying to find it to see if I could like quote it. I can't because Facebook is just a nightmarish mess of garbage. But the sentiment was basically like, vote him out or don't, like whatever happens with Trump, like impeach him or don't, whatever happens, like it still doesn't fix the broken system that put him there, that has empowered him, that has defended him, like all that stuff. So like regardless of if he's there in 2021 or not, like the underlying issues that allowed Trump to happen will still be there. and that's going to be a much bigger thing to dismantle than removing one guy from office. Like the like in my opinion, the Republicans have shown that they don't give a shit about like the working class or really anybody but themselves, and their agenda, because everybody who was outspoken against Trump during like the campaigns and stuff just fell lockstep behind him in when they were like, oh well, there's no real political like punishment if we don't. So yeah, let's just go ahead and support the guy because he's dumb enough. We can use him as a tool to get all the things we really want because he doesn't know better one way or the other. So we're just going to push every sort of far right agenda point that we can, and we can get it through because he was voted through with less than a majority, but he got the electoral college, and so we have everything. Ha 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 ha. And they've gotten a couple justices out of it, and so they don't care because that's like if God willing, they would or for them they're gonna get like one or two more justices before this is all said and done, and that sets the tone for the next 30 years of legislation, compared to whatever the next president comes in and does. And we've already seen kind of some of those shifts now that the court is 5-4 conservative. So yay, nightmare. Anyway, should we move on to the B story?
Yes, the B story. This is a you story. Should we brought this forward?
Yeah, I'll drive this one. So I pulled in one of the things I love every month because I'm a data management nerd is the NPD the NPD results. And so the April NPD results came in last week. And so I pulled in for the sake of our story a VentureBeat article that kind of had a lot of the highlights really showcasing for NPD. The biggest response being this was the first full month that a lot of people were in quarantine, as tracked by NPD, and as a result, total game sales were up 73% year over year, up to almost $1.5 billion, and that's hardware,
Jesus.
that's software, that's accessories, all that stuff. It was a record April, surpassing 2008's 1.2 billion, which was largely driven by the release of GTA 4 at the time, as well as Mario Kart Wii. Were kind of the big heavy hitters back in 2008, and it was also
Great Mario Kart game.
a few months before the recession we just spoke.
A recession.
So that's why subsequent years didn't really have as much impact. And yeah, just Grand Theft Auto launching in April, that's going to be the highest month of any year probably. Year to date, sales are up to 4.5 billion, 12% up year over year. Final Fantasy Remake was the top April seller, and it is the number 3 year to date seller so far in 2020. It is the best selling game on the PlayStation 4 in 2020, and it was a franchise record, surpassing 2016's Final Fantasy 15. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is number 2 this month again, and remains the best-selling game of 2020, because Call of Duty, despite every think piece out there that says this is the year Call of Duty dies, Call of Duty never dies. So maybe we'll stop getting those think pieces. It's the best-selling game of 2020. It's the best-selling game of the last 12-month period, ending in April. And then it is the fourth fastest selling release in history, and that's dollars sales through the first 7 months. I don't know what the first 3 are. That's a Matt Piscatella pull that you'd have to.
GTA 5 is in there.
I'm sure GTA 5 is in there, and I'm sure the others are other. It's either GTA 5 and GTA 4 and another Call of Duty, or it's GTA 5 and 2 other Call of Duties. Would be my guess. Animal Crossing New Horizons is number 3, and that's without digital sales because Nintendo does not report them to the NPD. And it is the number 2 best-selling game of the year, and it is the best-selling Switch game of the last 12 months. And then lastly, the last little note I have in here is somewhat notable in its absence in the top 20 on April's NPD charts is Doom Eternal, which launched out there right alongside Animal Crossing, did not make it, but also Bethesda does not report digital sales to the NPD. So it's possible Doom Eternal did better, but even in March, its debut month, it was only number 6 on the charts. So Doom Eternal, I think, just is targeted at a much more niche market anyway, and it isn't as family friendly as something like Animal Crossing, or isn't as ubiquitous as your Call of Duties and your Grand Theft Autos. So it falls into the more commonplace, like it charts in the month it comes out because it has that big flurry of initial sales, and then it falls off. The fact that it doesn't like Dragon Ball Z Kakarot or whatever is still on the NPD charts, and Doom Eternal probably isn't something Bethesda would like, but I'm sure Bethesda's looking at their own numbers, including digital, and saying, we're either fine with how Doom Eternal is doing or we're not, whatever the case may be. So so those are the kind of the highlights that I wanted to pull out. Anything in particular jump out at you as compelling or interesting information there, Logan?
I mean, the immediate one is I want to talk about Doom, obviously. Like, we talked a little bit before the show started, too, about this. And less so about its sales numbers and more so about, I feel like when Doom and Animal Crossing kind of got pegged for the same time, at least for me personally, I expected them each to have a big pop, and I didn't know which one I thought was going to do like better in terms of kind of the industry conversation. And at least within my kind of circle and timeline, it felt like Doom had a pop for like maybe a week, and then just Animal Crossing swallowed everything. And like, it's hard for anybody to know, I guess, to know whether that would have been the case no matter what, or if it was kind of everybody going to lockdown with like Corona, and then that just kind of amplified kind of Animal Crossing, and Doom was a game you beat in 8 hours and you're done with it kind of thing. But I am surprised at just how much it felt like Doom was in the conversation for like a half a second, and then it was done.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who falls into basically that camp, where I played Doom and like I enjoyed it, I thought it was great, and then I put it aside. Like the thing is, Animal Crossing is a games as service type of game, so like it is going to be an ongoing conversation. They are doing, regular in-game events, so every couple weeks there's a new thing to talk about in Animal Crossing versus, maybe a new thing to talk about in Doom's multiplayer, or whenever the, eventual Doom story DLC comes out. There will be, an uptick in that, but Doom's multiplayer is such a small percentage of the Doom player base that it's not. That's not driving traffic. That's not driving conversations. People aren't, and there's just not, like the narrative around Animal Crossing is how people are customizing the game, or in this Corona time, how people are, and we talked about this a little bit on that Nerdy Site show a couple weeks ago. The idea that people are having birthdays in Animal Crossing, or graduations, or like even weddings and stuff, talk shows in Animal Crossing. Animal talking, like. Animal Crossing is being used as a social, stand-in because we couldn't be social right around the time it was coming out, which Doom can't do. Like Doom is not going to be like, hey, let's have a talk show in Doom. So that's kind of like one of the just different wild differences between those two games. And then as far, just Doom Eternal as well, I think, did have a bit of a mixed reception, because I really enjoyed a lot of the the new platforming stuff, but a lot of people did not. A lot of people thought it was a step back from the 2016 version of the game. So that, I think, also tampered expectations. But I think it does also come down to, between those two games, Animal Crossing being a fun for all ages kind of game versus Doom Eternal being a, very hard R, very bloody, gory. Like, I didn't even play the original 2016 Doom because I remember seeing trailers for it and being like, I'm not a huge fan of gore for the sake of gore. I don't think I'm going to sit down and play that one. And it wasn't until like reception for it came out of it being so good that I picked it up, later after launch and sat down with it. And I was very glad I did, but it is still a very intense kind of game, and yeah, there is probably an element of everybody being stressed out in the world that they didn't really want to also be stressed out in Doom. Doom's also a freaking hard ass game. Even on like baby mode, there are some enemy types in there that are just brutal and unforgiving, and it's like that's not a fun way to spend time if you're already locked in quarantine and stuff, and you just want to escape for a little bit. It's not as power fantasy as you might want it to be for a game like that. So, like, I mean, to like as the parallel right now, like Maneater is the is kind of one of the games that is taking the social media space by storm right now, and I finished it and really loved it as well. It's the RPG where you play as a shark and you just kind of go around taking out hunters. And leveling up your shark and getting special shark powers and stuff like that, and it's a fun power fantasy, and that's like what people are attracted to right now. So, but still, like Animal Crossing is still dominating the feeds and everything because people have found ways to make that a very shareable kind of game. And keep it in the mind share, and people are picking it up as a result of that. People are, the FOMO eventually strikes, and people are like, okay, I've seen everybody else having fun with Animal Crossing. It hasn't gone away. I'm gonna go ahead and pick up Animal Crossing now. Like Andrea Renee did that at What's Good Games, a month ago or whatever, and she's fallen in love with it, having never enjoyed it or never wanted to care about an Animal Crossing game prior to that. She's out there talking about even right before we started recording this. I caught a little bit of their What's Good Games live this morning, and she was talking about terraforming, and she's trying to create like a beach resort kind of thing on her island to play with the aesthetics of it and make that a thing. So I think Animal Crossing doesn't like. It surprises me. I don't think it would have had the legs that it has had in not quarantine. Like, I probably wouldn't have picked it up had we not been in quarantine, because it's a game that I hadn't even cared about really. And even walking away from PAX, like I was kind of like, it's gonna be fun for Animal Crossing fans, but I'm not an Animal Crossing fan, was kind of like my takeaway from PAX. And then I fell deep into it, and I check in with it like for an hour or two a day at least. Still 2 months in now, or 2 months in, because it came out like right before my birthday. So or right after my birthday rather. It's like that is a game like your Minecrafts that kind of has ongoing appeal to a very family-friendly audience. So the fact that it has survived and Doom Eternal has not, I think doesn't surprise me. The fact that Doom Eternal, I mean, also, I guess because NPD is really only looking at physical for that, the fact that physical copies of Doom Eternal are probably hard to come by, or people aren't going and buying physical copies of things right now, probably also kept it from making an appearance here in April, in which when had the quarantine not been in the case, maybe it still would have cracked the top 20 somewhere, maybe not top 10 even, but it would have still been hovering in there around like 12 or 13 or something, if people could go and people were comfortable going to retail outlets and picking up copies of that game. But with shipping and stuff being delayed on non-essential stuff, people maybe aren't picking it up physically. Maybe they're picking it up digitally, and again, Bethesda's maybe still very happy with how it's selling, but we don't see that side of things here.
My other one that I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on too is just how surprised are you that Final Fantasy VII Remake is the best performing Final Fantasy game ever in terms of units and dollars?
I'm not at all surprised. I very much would have expected that, given Final Fantasy VII's like mind share over the last 20
Reverence,
years.
yeah.
Like it didn't it was, the best seller at the time. Final Fantasy VII was, but that was, in a significantly smaller market, and it has had 20 years of people buying and discovering Final Fantasy VII in the people that weren't there, in 1997, 98, kind of playing that game when it was first coming out. People have heard about it so much, and it's been re-released on, so many different platforms that people have eventually picked it up, and so it had a very wide base to pull from. And then also people who had heard about it so much but didn't want to pick it up because they couldn't get past the PS1 style graphics or whatever, coming back to it now in 2020. They were like, okay, this is a good entry point for me. So you had kind of both sides of the potential audience clamoring for this game and getting interested in it. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that it did well. I guess it surprised me a little bit that it broke through the Call of Duty's kind of barrier, and a lot of that is benefiting from the fact that this was Call of Duty's 7th month on the charts, compared compared to the first, in which case, Final Fantasy VII would not have made the top. But given your other competition alongside Final Fantasy VII as like a new game, was like Resident Evil 3, I think, or was that even that might even have been March. Resident Evil 3 was March too. So you didn't have like a lot of new games coming onto the chart here in April anyway. So like Final Fantasy VII had kind of the runway to really take the ball and run with it. I mean, like one of the things that I threw in here as a bullet point that I may have just even glossed over in my breakdown is that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Remastered reached number 7 on the charts, and it was only it came out on April 30th. So it was only on the charts for 3 days, and it already cracked 7. So maybe with a full month, that one would have even surpassed Final Fantasy 7, and Final Fantasy 7 would have been number 2. Who knows? But with where each one respectively came out, it makes sense that it was like it had a huge groundswell going for it, and the fact that reception for it beforehand was so high, people were like, yeah, I definitely want to pick this up. And the fact that it was one of the last AAA games you could get before everything started getting delayed and pushed into whenever they had a more standard supply chain. Also, like there was potential fear of like, this is going to be the last big game I can buy before the year end, potentially. I mean, like Tim Geddes over at Kind of Funny kept saying like, what if Final Fantasy VII is like the last AAA game we get this year because game delays or shipping delays and people can't reliably get the games in stores. What's going to happen there? Obviously, in the time since, we've seen companies starting to feel more comfortable, giving dates to Last of Us and Ghost of Tsushima and all that stuff. But there was a time there, back when this game was coming out and when those sales were starting to hit, that people were maybe panicking about like, oh, this might be the last one I get before, because who knows what the world's going to look like in a month or two. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII, and it also coming out here at the end of a cycle, or at the end of a system generation, on the plate with 110 plus million, I think, PlayStation 4s out in the wild or whatever, somewhere around there, means that it had a significant install base that it could draw from anyway, compared to if this had come out halfway through the cycle or something like that. So I think, yeah, a lot of that helped drive Final Fantasy VII to the top spot.
Anything stick out to you?
One of the things I didn't highlight here in our bullet points, but one of the things that the article highlights is the idea that on the Xbox, the Xbox's top selling games for April, 3 of them are Call of Duty games. The top 2 are Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2 because they didn't have a Final Fantasy 7. And then number 8 in the Xbox is Call of Duty Black Ops 3. So the fact that like Call of Duty is making up, and you think of, like, when I think of Call of Duty, I still think of Xbox because I think of, the Xbox 360 is where that fan base kind of centered around. And so I think even though this generation Activision went with PS4 for kind of all their marketing details, like the player base is still largely an Xbox player base, it seems.
On Xbox One, yeah.
So the fact that, they're still supporting it and that's where they go for it. And you see kind of 3 of the top 10 selling games are just variations of Call of Duty. Like it's at the same point like amusing, and also that's what I kind of expect from Xbox. But like the amusing part is like that is dividing the player base in 3 different ways. You have because you have your Call of Duty players who are playing Black Ops 3, you have your Call of Duty players who are playing Modern Warfare, and then you have your ones who are playing the remaster of Modern Warfare 2. The fact that like each of those 3 games has enough of an install base or enough of a dedicated player base to to crack the top 10 there on Xbox is fascinating to me, especially because I will never forget when I actually met somebody who was one of those people who only buys Call of Duty every year. A guy who worked for me for a brief time at my last job. I was like, wow, Richard, you are the person that like I always think about in these stories, but I've never actually met one in real life. Like, who is it who only buys your Call of Duty or your Madden every year? Who is it that like can explain why Call of Duty has 15 million in sales every year compared to, I think, like even Final Fantasy 7 here, I think only was like 3.5 million, and 3.5 million was enough to take the top spot. But it's like, and I guess that's worldwide. I think was that, so not even like NPD, which is I believe US specific. But anyway, it was just mind blowing seeing one of those people in real life who, he had a squad of people that he played with, and that's what they did on every weekend. They just hopped in, they played, round after round of Call of Duty for a couple hours. Like he'd prestiged like 2 or 3 times, I think, in whichever version of Call of Duty had come out that year. And it was just fascinating talking to him about that, and being like, it blows my mind that like, because I just love the variety of every other game that I play too much to be locked into one game and that be the only thing I play every year. So yeah, seeing those kinds of people, and even I was watching I'm rewatching Chuck, the TV show, and in one of the season 2 episodes, I think they had they very clearly had like some kind of Madden tie-in, because people coming into the buy more and playing Madden is a whole like subplot of the episode. And it's like, yep, that's a whole other thing, is like these guys who get together, have their football parties or whatever, and they just play Madden. And that's what they do, that's what they play. Those kinds of people are just like, they're not the kinds of people that are listening to podcasts like this or that are following the news that we follow. They just kind of like, that is the game that they play to unwind from their stress, and they probably wouldn't consider themselves gamers or whatever. They think like, oh no, I play Madden, but I'm not really a gamer. That's probably how they describe themselves. And it's fascinating to like remember, in this space where we do cover stuff and we cover a wide variety, that there are way more of them than there are of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or
I think that is
maybe not even way more of them, but because that is the one thing they play, they are so focused on that one thing, whereas like the wider space that we try and cover is casting such a wide net. You have your people who like will only play PC stuff, or your people who only play on one console, or you have people who will play everything, or you have people who will play only horror stuff, or like it is just such a wider pool compared to, this is what I am, this is the one game I play, and then next year when a new one comes out, I'm gonna play that one. That's it's just a weird subset of weird but large subset of the industry.
Well, and one that I think just gets kind of forgotten about, I think, more often than you would kind of imagine among our larger community.
Yeah. I mean, like another one of the ones, another one of the findings in here, not necessarily a finding, but just something that definitely stands out is all of the sports games, coming back to the top of the charts. Not that they ever really leave the top of the charts, but the resurgence of them in as sports in real life were being shuttered across. You see NBA 2K, MLB The Show, and Madden kind of in the top 10 for the year so far, basically being like, hey, yeah, this is how people are getting their sports fix right now, potentially. And they might have had 7 or 8 months to have played those games as well already, but now that they're not going to get or if they get a 21 version of the game, it's going to be what's it going to look like in a world where they didn't have sports for
that's
a
the
year.
one I'm really curious about. Yeah. So. I agree. My final point on this before we go to the shoutouts, I'm going to say is that I'm going to give you and me a homework project after this podcast goes up there for next week's. That is going to be one of our topics, and I'm excited about it based off of this.
Okay.
So a little tease for the audience. On to the shoutouts.
You're not going to tell me what my homework assignment is now. You're going to tell me it after the fact.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you off there.
Okay.
To the shoutouts, they're just two quick ones. Just because I couldn't not do, and that one is from Waypoint Radio's podcast, which they do like excerpts of that you can kind of read, and that's what I did for this. And it's called "We Have a Lot of Questions About Shiv Palpatine." It is Austin Walker just kind of musing aloud. What is Shiv Palpatine's plan? What is his goal? And the ensuing conversation I thought was really kind of funny and illuminating in what they kind of go to, both because what is Shiv Palpatine's plan? What is his end goal here? What is he trying to do, really?
Yeah, it doesn't really stack up throughout the course of the movie. Like it changes,
and it's great multiple
times.
It's great too because Austin Walker's whole thing is no, but for real, over the course of these 9 movies, what is he trying to do? I get it, he's trying to become emperor, but then what? And it's really funny to see kind of what they try to envision his kind of long-term goal was after just being emperor. They all agreed, though, which I thought was really interesting, that Palpatine is at his best in the prequels, where he's just having fun, chewing scenes up, and just being an asshat, just manipulating everyone, which I probably agree to. But it's a ton of fun. I'm very much in a Star Wars mood right now. Again, I am 2/3 of the way through the original trilogy this weekend, and so it's on my mind, but also just because, Rise of Skywalker is dumb, and Palpatine's dumb in it, and maybe here's the real twist: Palpatine was always kind of dumb, so that was a really fun conversation. And then a different one that I want to give a shout out to, also from Waypoint or Vice Gaming or whatever the fuck you want to call it now, is Crusader Kings 3 wants to be medieval soap opera for everyone. And this is more like a Logan switch because Crusaders King, I feel like, is a series that I've always really wanted to get into, but just couldn't because it's wild. It's so dense and it's so complicated and it's so messy. There's just so many, people who've played this game for, years still need to, read Wikipedia pages in order to understand how to play the game. And I'm just that's mad to me, guys. So the idea of it being maybe something a bit more welcoming to everybody, right? The comparison that kept getting made was it's going to be a bit more like The Sims now, like Sims 4 kind of thing. Everybody can play this game after a few hours. It very much excites me and the history lover in me. So I also want to give a shout out to that interview story feature.
Cool. I mean, I didn't have any prepared shoutouts, but one of the things I did look at, just because you included the we have a lot of questions about Sheev, I think was from that same episode where it's talking about it was a thing I saw kind of earlier this morning, talking about and it kind of goes off of what Jarrett talked about last week, so it might have even been what they were talking about in that episode or something, but it talks about where do we assign credit in solo projects, and it's another, it seems like another excerpt from the podcast because it has Austin says this, and then Gita says this, and
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, I'll include that in shoutouts as well.
Absolutely.
And I'll pull the link for that. But it was a kind of a fascinating little read because like Gita approaches it from the stance of like the artistic or the fine arts world where you see art remixed all the time, and people kind of put their own slants on stuff, and you don't then credit the original artist. It is like this is the I guess like what would be the like the Andre the Giant Hope Bay or the Hope Obama poster or whatever, like from Shepard Fairey, I think, who like so. he took somebody's picture, like a print photo of Obama, and kind of like made an artistic version of it or whatever, and that became his version, and you see that kind of stuff in the fine art world all the time. And I mean, even Animal Crossing has all sorts of like little art pieces that you can collect in the game and create your own little museum. It's like, well, do you then have to start crediting like Rodin and all the the sculptors and artists that are now being featured in that work? Like Animal Crossing is not. So yeah, it is a kind of fascinating conversation in how it applies to the art of making video games. Because at some point, like, okay, if somebody created this asset that then gets bought in the the Unreal Engine store or something like that, do you have to then credit that person for everything that their game that their asset gets used in? It seems unlikely. But anyway, so yeah, that would be my my makeshift shout out here.
It's a great one. It really just go to Waypoint. Apparently, just go to Vice Gaming this week, kids. That's where all the shout outs are at. And that concludes this week's episode. Thank you for listening. I have a brand new outro because I forgot it for the first weeks. You should go over, if you like what you listen to patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Pretty sure I nailed that. Yep. If not, Trevor will edit in something here. And yeah, donate some money if you'd like to. If not, that's okay too. We appreciate your support and your listening. But there are a ton of great patrons we have out there who've donated to help support all kinds of good shows, including this one. And we very much appreciate all of that. So thank you to all the patrons that we have. If you did like what you listened to here, be sure to subscribe, like, and share with all your friends. We're on all kinds of audio platforms out there, including iTunes. So please give us 5 stars. It very much helps, especially for new podcasts like this one. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. Anything you would like to plug, Trevor?
Yeah, go check out the episode of That D Plus show this week. Logan joined me, and we talked about WALL-E because it was Logan's first time seeing WALL-E, and so we sat about that and talked about it for a good hour.
Mm-hmm. I very much agree. You can find me at LeftyLogie on Twitter. I would also give a shout out to that conversation. It was one of my favorite podcasts we've done in a while, I think. It was a lot of fun to just kind of gush about WALL-E. I would also give a shout out to another podcast that Trevor did. This one I'm not on, unfortunately, but I just loved the pitch that I just tweeted on Twitter about it earlier in the day. That you, Cam, and Jazz all sat down apparently for That Nerdy Site show and talked about your very first best friends. I have not listened to this podcast yet, so if it is terrible, my apologies, but it sounds way too good to be terrible. I'm very excited to listen to it whenever I get done recording. It sounds like a very fun time you guys had on that one.
Yeah, it was interesting because that whole topic and premise came up when Jazz was like, so I have a quarantine mystery that I want to tell you guys about. And she started out by asking us like who our best friends were, and then both me and Cameron kind of like told these detailed stories about like our first best friends growing up or whatever. And then Jazz kind of details a story about how like, cool, I like remember mine, but I don't know like enough about him to track him down anymore or something. And so it has become this like thing that her whole family has become involved in, and trying to like reach out to people from their past on trying to like reconnect her with this person. So yeah, check out that fun story from this week's episode of That Nerdy Site show.
I thought that it was a lot of fun as a pitch, so go check that out as well. I would probably say go stay tuned to That D Plus show. I imagine there will be some Star Wars-y conversations in the future that might rope a few of us together to do something about that, because I got thoughts and feelings. And then be sure to just stay tuned to all kinds of things from That Nerdy site. We have all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of features, all kinds of goodies for all of you out there. You can find That Nerdy site on Twitter and Instagram at That Nerdy site. And yeah, thank you for listening. And I forget. I should really listen to the end of these podcasts. I forget. I do a different outro every time. Anyway, you know what? Thanks for listening, and play your games.